Well, the Prime Minister has been resisting calls to name China as the primary culprit behind a rise in foreign interference in Australia. Australia's spy chief has sounded the alarm on espionage and the increasing threat of right-wing extremism in a wide-ranging address. For more, joining us live now is Independent MP Andrew Wilkie. Andrew, appreciate your time. Thank you. As a former intelligence analyst for ONA, what did you make of the warnings we heard last night about foreign interference and espionage levels being higher than Cold War levels?
Yeah, good afternoon, Ashley. Look, I think the speech by the head of ASIO last night made perfect sense. We've always known, well, we've known for many years now that terrorism is an issue, but also increasingly espionage and foreign interference and right-wing extremism. I think it was a very sensible wake-up call from Mr Burgess. No doubt the government is now, extra alert to these threats, and it's interesting to compare it to the Cold War period, because of course these days, our competitors and our adversaries have access to a much broader range of technologies. It's so much easier to reach into Australia electronically, to eavesdrop, to hack information, to spy on us, and there's any number of countries around the world with very developed capabilities. It's fair enough that we focus on China in this regard, because they are a competitor in any number of ways, both economically and geographically. But that doesn't mean that we've got to all be spooked and think that these people aren't people we can work with. I mean, China is, of course, our natural economic partner these days, and the challenge for any government of any colour is to manage our economic partnership with China with our historic and strategic partnership with the US. It is a reminder that we need to be careful about taking sides, and I think our best path through these challenges is to get on well with both China and the US and everyone else.
I'm keen for your view on another story dominating there in Canberra today, this push by Labor and the Greens for Bettina Arndt to have her Australia Day honours stripped from her over comments she made about the recent terrible murders of Hannah Clark and her children. Is that a move you're supporting?
Oh, absolutely, Ashley. I think the comments in recent times from Bettina Arndt are unacceptable. I mean, there is no excuse for domestic violence. There is no excuse whatsoever, and we should never default to blaming, even in part, the victim, because there is no excuse for anyone, and it is often a man when it comes to physical violence. There is no excuse for anyone, and in particular any man, to be violent against anyone else and a woman, and this murder of Hannah Clark, what a wake-up call. I mean, this is the stuff of nightmares, and it is not the time for Bettina or anyone else to start talking either directly, or I think Pauline Hanson's been talking in code, basically blaming victims and being, I think, sympathetic to men at a time when it is entirely unwarranted.
Well, we'll be watching the outcome of that Senate motion a bit later today when Labor does put that into the Senate, trying to strip Bettina Arndt of that honour. I do want your view on another issue with the WikiLeaks founder. Julian Assange was in London overnight in court. This process has now begun for the UK to decide whether or not to extradite him to the US. We know that last week you were in London, you saw Mr Assange in the flesh. How was that experience? Did he strike you in terms of physical, mental state as being poorly? Is he expecting, do you think, that he will be extradited to the US?
Yeah, well, last week, George Christensen, the Queensland LNP member, and myself, we went to London, and we both met with Julian for about 90 minutes in Belmarsh Prison. And my impression of him is that the assessment by the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Torture, Professor Niels Melzer, is right. I mean, Professor Melzer did an assessment for the United Nations recently, and he said that Julian Assange, appears to be someone who has been enduring psychological torture. I think that's right. I mean, he's a tougher man than I am. He spent 7 or 8 years in the Ecuadorian embassy. He's been about a year in Belmarsh Prison, almost all of that effectively in solitary confinement. It's taking its toll, and he's under enormous pressure. I do note that last night in Woolwich Court was the first day of the hearings for the extradition. I note that the US has already made the case again that Julian Assange broke US law and endangered US interests. But I note again, or I note still, the US has yet to name a single person who was killed or as a result of the WikiLeaks leaks. In fact, I think we're already starting to hear echoes of the Chelsea Manning trial, where the US famously said, you know, many people were endangered, and when pressed, they gave the example of an Afghan citizen during the Afghan war, or the ongoing Afghan war, who disappeared, but then when pressed in the Chelsea Manning court-martial, that US official, a Brigadier General, admitted that missing person wasn't named in the WikiLeaks data dump, and they don't know why he disappeared anyway. So, you know, I think we're going to have a reiteration of the Chelsea Manning case, and I would hope that Julian Assange's defence focuses very much on the facts, and that at the end of the day, when you boil this all the way down, he is a journalist and a publisher who published information in the public interest, including evidence, hard evidence of US war crimes. He should be treated as such. I think it's the opinion of a great many people now, especially as more people understand the facts of the matter. It's their opinion that the extradition is unwarranted. It should be dropped and he should return to Australia.
Yeah, and very interesting to see a number of politicians from across the political divide coming to that view. Andrew Wilkie, appreciate you joining us live there in Canberra. Thank you.
Thanks, Ashley.